Thank you for having us. Baba, it's our pleasure to talk about Adi and Baba. So, as Daniel was alluding to, this will be a three-part presentation. The first part will be a brief bio of Adi, so everyone's captured it. We all know bits and pieces, but I'll just lay it out briefly for one and all. And then we'll catch up with current events where Jack Small entered the scene, and then we'll open up for a few stories. We'll share a couple of stories here to get it started, and then if anyone else, a little closer. Then if anyone else has any other memories, fond memories, or stories, entertaining or illuminating or fun, please, you are invited to share. So many of you know Adi was born in 1903, and his parents lived in Ahmednagar, a convenient location if you want to meet Baba. His dad owned, his parents owned Kushru Quarters, which now everyone knows as the Trust Compound. So it was donated later by Adi to the Trust. Also, for anyone that doesn't know, Mehrabad used to belong to Adi K Irani, Adi's father. And so that land was donated from Adi's family to Baba's cause as well. So a lot of connection there. Adi arrives on the scene, and we'll fast forward to when he's about 16 years of age. At that time, his mother, Gulmai, has an unusual dream one night. In this dream, it turned out to be all night long dream where this Hindu, she being Zoroastrian, had no interest in Hindus, where this Hindu man, strange looking, sits down and visits with her all night long, tells her things. And it's a very mystical feeling to the dream, and so she's kind of startled by it. And subsequently, then one of her relatives begins to put pressure on her to go visit this Hindu master named Upasani Maharaj. Some of you may have heard of him. So Gulmai agrees to, and she goes to meet him, and of course, lo and behold, it's one and the same person as was in her dream. So she recognizes him, of course, from the dream, and then also being in his august presence, she can feel there's something extraordinary about his being, and she falls at his feet and begins to go see him subsequently. Now, her husband and her two sons, they're not into any of this stuff. They're just regular, ordinary, run-of-the-mill, average brand Zoroastrians. And they're not into mixing Hinduism with Zoroastrianism or anything absurd like that. But Gulmai has other things in mind. And so she cooks up some ruse to get Adi to come with her. Adi was away at the time at boarding school in Panjgani High School. Oh, not too far away. What, less than 100 miles, Jack? Something? So Adi comes home for summer vacation, and Gulmai has some ruse, and so she's taking Adi and somebody else, and they're all going to see Upasani Maharaj. Adi's not thrilled at all. He's not into this stuff. And they arrive. Adi meets Upasani Maharaj, and just one look, and he's so overwhelmed, and feels something so profound in the presence of Upasani Maharaj, something greater than he had ever imagined or felt with any other person, and he finds himself falling at Maharaj's feet. So subsequently, Adi and Gulmai begin to trek regularly to Upasani Maharaj's ashram in Sakari. Just so happens that who's the #1 disciple of Upasani Maharaj? Mehrwan Irani, soon to be Meher Baba. And so they meet Mehrwan, and a close alliance is forged. Subsequently, as everyone here pretty much knows, but I'll just say it for the record here, that Upasani Maharaj reached a point where he announced that he had painted Mehrwan with all the colors of the rainbow. And he selected a number of, Upasani Maharaj selected a number of his own followers and assigned them to Baba. And so off they go. And naturally, Gulmai and Adi were amongst that troop. So then we fast forward a little bit to 1921 now. That was in 1918. Adi was 16 years of age. So now Adi's 18. And who shows up into town but Glory Shaw? And everyone here remember about Glory Shaw? Well, for the record, I'll just say quickly that his tomb is at Lower Mehrabad. And Baba did stipulate that he was on the 6th plane. Have you ever seen that green-colored grave with like a tent over it? Yeah, that's. So this is 1921. Glory Shaw comes into Ahmednagar, starts hanging out, and starts going out to visit what will in the future be Lower Mehrabad, and he's checking out his future grave site. At this time, he somehow comes into contact with Adi and begins to come around to Kushru quarters and, you know, ring out at the front gates, and then Adi would see him and of course run out, and they'd come in and have chai together. And so I was just thinking to myself, gee, who was I hanging with when I was 18? Nobody particularly advanced, and certainly no one on any plane whatsoever. So Adi had some pretty rare company, I would say, at age 18. And it was interesting because Glory would visit Adi on a regular basis, and one time when Baba was there, Baba was hiding behind not hiding, he was sitting behind a screen there, and Glory came and rang outside, and Adi jumped up, and Baba said, he waved Adi off, don't go. It's an awkward situation. But Adi obeyed and didn't go. And so Glory took the hint and left. But Baba didn't want Adi to mingle with any other saint or master. So beginning of a lifelong teaching there. So then in 1923, Mehrabad was established by Baba, and Adi and Gulmai and Adi's older brother Rustam, they were all drawing much closer to Baba with so much contact. At one point, Baba, was constantly emphasizing the importance of obedience. And so a day came when Baba sent Adi and Rustam on an important message, but he emphasized to Adi, he said, you must be back here by 12 noon. And I said, yes, of course, we'll do it. And so Adi and Rustam go and to accomplish this bit of work for Baba. Rustam gets a little chatty, and things take longer than planned, and Adi is not as insistent as he could have and should have been. And so finally, Adi drags his brother, they get in the car, and Adi's driving like mad to make it back to Baba before noon. And as he rounds a bend, kids are playing on the side of the street, and one kid pushes another right in front of Adi's car. Child is killed. Adi screeches to the brakes, his hands are on the wheel, and he looks at his watch, 12 noon. Another lesson in obedience. And so there was a big court case. Eventually Adi was exonerated, but it was touch and go for a while, and you don't know how those things can go. We know that in this world, relative justice is not always de facto. Another lesson in obedience came when a former professor, college professor of Adi's, came to Lower Mehrabad. And Adi thought that, well, this will be nice. My professor gets to meet Baba, and I'm sure he'll be suitably impressed. And the professor was anything but. And so then, at one point, the professor began to berate Baba and belittle him extensively. And Baba just took it, no problem. But Adi, being an extremely strong-willed young lad with a backbone a mile wide, he finally reached his limit. And even though his professor was his senior, he unleashed on this professor and just let him have it. Who the hell do you think you're talking to, sir? And on like that. And the professor turns to Bob and said, "So these are the kinds of disciples you have, huh?" And walks away. And so now Adi is just fuming. And Baba gives him the contrary mood immediately and says, "Run after him and get his forgiveness." So that's a difficult challenge for anybody to switch moods like that. Adi does it. He goes running after that professor and starts begging forgiveness, and the professor is saying, "Get away from me, just leave me alone, and you're detestable," and etc. So Adi realizes that the guy's going to get in the car and he's not going to get his forgiveness, so he throws himself on the ground and latches onto the professor's foot and hangs on. He's saying, "I'm sorry, please forgive me, please forgive me." And the professor's dragging him back. "Jow, Jow, get away, you dog." And so finally, to break free of Adi's iron grip, the professor, "Okay, I forgive you." And so, job accomplished, order obeyed, and Adi returns to Baba. Another event that occurred in those early days was Adi. I guess most of you have all seen pictures of Adi when he was young. He was terribly good looking, and we weren't the only ones that noticed that from photographs. I'm sure the young ladies above and Nagar noticed that too. Anyway, Adi falls in love and with a beautiful young lady, and they're in love and they want to get married. So Adi tells Baba all about it, and Baba goes, "Fine, bring her to me." And little does Adi know that Baba has something else in mind for Adi's life. So he sits them down. He says, "Okay, bring 2 chairs. Put them back to back, each facing away. So their backs are to each other. Adi's this way here, and the young lady's sitting behind him, facing the other direction." And then Baba proceeds to give a lengthy dissertation to this girl on how miserable her life will be if she were to marry Adi K Irani. Just goes on and on and on and on, and this girl just comes unglued. She never wants to talk to Adi again. So there went Adi's marriage plans out the window, and Adi had to take it. He didn't really have to sit there and take it. Nobody does have to. You all have a choice. But he was already being groomed and trained in the importance of obedience. And what is obedience if it's always easy, right? When it's really tough, that's when it really matters. So he obeyed and kept his mouth shut and lost his lady love. So those are some examples of these early days of Adi with Baba. Then in the 1930s, an event happened that really made a singular impression on Adi. And that is, at Kushru quarters, there was a room that was kept specifically for Upasani Maharaj when he would drop by for a visit. So you got 6 planers dropping by, you got perfect masters dropping by. Live at Kushru quarters. So, in fact, many of you know the room that Khurshid later occupied. That was Upasani Maharaj's room. So, at any rate, Upasani pops in one day, and so, of course, he's given all the attention that someone of his stature deserves. And to Gulmai and Adi's surprise, Padri was there also. Upasani asks for the arti tray. Now, an arti tray is usually something that a disciple will, light oil and incense and things, and sing an arti song to a master. So it's an opportunity for a disciple to praise a master. And yet here's the master asking for the arti tray. So they bring it to him. And Upasani Maharaj then begins to sing praises to Baba. And of course, Gulmai and Adi are shocked because the master is now worshiping the disciple. They've never heard or seen anything like that. So then after the prayers are over, Upasani Maharaj turns to Adi and says, "Who do you think Meherwan is?" And Adi, always being a clever boy, he said, "Well, you being his master, sir, would certainly know much better than I." At which point Upasni said, "Marwan is the avatar." And Adi went, "Got it." So that was an event in the 30s. Also, there's a couple of other just quick vignettes as we move through the chronological history. Adi went to all through the 30s on every trip to the West. So then there in Italy in the 30s, Adi could be a little bit of a trickster, and the men Mondoli were kept separate from everybody else. Their quarters were private, separate. And they weren't allowed to cross over to where anybody else was staying. They could come and go to the main meeting rooms, but that was it. And now, where were all the chocolate desserts and treats and things like that? They were in this central area that the men Mondoli were forbidden to go to. But Adi did notice there was a nice bowl of delicious chocolates there. So Kakabaria was allowed to go back and forth as a liaison. So he sweet talks Kaka as a newbie to bring him the chocolates. He says, "Look, just bring them and we'll share them, we'll split them." And Kaka says, no, Baba, I don't think Baba wants this." He says, "Look, I'm not going in there. That's obeying Baba's order." "And did Baba say that you couldn't bring them?" "Okay, all right, Adi, sounds persuasive, okay." So he does so, and Adi munches them all. This is a story Adi tells. Yes, this is, "I began to eat them, and then, well, one thing after another, and pretty soon I ate them all. There were no more left." So then Kakabaria comes in, and he finds they're gone, and he's a little bit horrified. And then, of course, Baba naturally finds out, calls them in, and begins to take them to task. Well, now Adi is well trained in the importance of obedience and also what can happen if you don't obey. So Baba begins to take them to task, and Adi says, "Can I just ask one question?" Baba says, "Yes." And Adi says, "If I told Kakabaria to jump in the lake, should he?" In other words, Kakabaria didn't have to bring Adi the chocolate just because Adi asked. So Kaka is mortified that Adi's like throwing him under the bus. But these were the kind of shenanigans that went on. Then in 1944, Chanchi died. Adi became Baba's personal secretary and engaged in extensive correspondence with Baba lovers all over India, news centers, and in the West and everywhere. And then in the 40s and in the 50s, Adi also began to go around and give speaking engagements. No, not until the 50s. That's right. So 40s began extensive written correspondence. And then we fast forward to 1971. Baba's dropped his body, and Westerners are learning about Baba and starting to head for India, head for the homeland. One of them being Jack Small. So Jack shows up, Johnny on the spot, 1971. He's a lawyer in Los Angeles, and he just happens to be at the right place at the right time with Adi when Adi's talking with someone about going on a speaking tour to different parts of India. And Jack says, brilliantly, what did you say, Jack?
Well, that's not the part of the story that I was prepared to talk about.
This is your first meeting with Adi.
Right. And my first meeting with Adi is, there's a Kushru Quarters, there's a place where Baba lovers stayed, and Adi had a cousin who was there.
It's Vilu's Villa.
Vilu's Villa. So I went to Vilu's Villa, knocked on the door, and I met Adi. And I asked Adi, we started chit-chatting. Adi mentioned he was going on a trip. I said, if I pay for the trip, can I go with you? Can I drive you? Financially, I offered to pay for the expenses of the trip. And that started our relationship. And then I started to learn who Adi was. I didn't really know. I was just taking a chance.
Well, it was a wonderful chance you took. And thus began a series of visits to India that Jack would take every year. He'd take, I believe it was 3 months you took off every year.
Right, right.
And it was unusual. You're a new attorney in a law office, and which employer gives you 3 months off?
Amazing.
To run off to India?
Amazing how Baba did that to that man.
Yeah. It turns out that, I still remember his name, Carlson.
Right, Charles Carlson.
He just loved Jack. Jack could do no wrong. So Jack got carte blanche. Of course, we're not going to give Jack carte blanche, but Carlson did.
Right, right.
So then,
So Adi said yes. So I was driving Adi, paying for the expenses of his trip, doing Baba's work. And that was the beginning of our relationship.
well, it's a wonderful beginning. And so subsequently, every year, you would go to India for 3 months and go on a speaking tour with Adi.
Right.
And pay for it.
And paid for it.
It's a good trade.
It's a great trade. It's a great deal. One other story in terms of Lakshman. Did I mention that story?
Oh yeah, so Jack is now learning Indian ways, right? You get there, and after a while you learn their ways are different than ours. So it so happened that Adi had a manservant paid for, but this individual, Lakshman, was phenomenal. He was stupendous. He did more Baba work than many Baba workers. And so one day when Adi was gone on business,
They came up with a new law in which you're not supposed to drive or do something, whatever it was. I forgot what the law was, but they arrested Lakshman. And I heard about that. And I bicycled to the police department where they had Lakshman in jail. I said, why did you put this man here? I said, what business is it of yours? He's my friend. He's a friend of my friend. And I kept talking to them about this, asking them questions. And I wouldn't give up. They threatened to arrest me for bothering them. And I was a foreigner. And what I realized that the complications that would be caused by them arresting a foreigner for something so trivial would, be more complicated for them and their superiors. So they let Lakshman go. And then Adi realized stuff I could do to benefit him.
and this of course led the way to Jack eventually moving to India in 1975 and using his legal acumen to handle a lot of copyright material and other issues that came up for the trust.
Right.
So, good show, Jack.
Thank you, Baba, by the way, for giving me this opportunity.
Yes, by all means. Did you have anything else you wanted to add at this point about any of your trips with Adi, or?
Different places we went to all over India and America.
That's right, a number of trips to America. How many trips to America?
2.
70, 77,
78.
79, and 78 too?
78, there are 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me just use this. So, you told me once that you were with Adi on one of these trips,
Right.
and you said to Adi, you were having dinner with him one night, the two of you, and you said to Adi, Adi, I want you to treat me the way Baba treated you.
Big mistake.
Do you remember what he did?
I just remember what a stupid thing, arrogant thing for me to say.
Can I tell you what he did?
Please.
He picked up a glass of milk and threw it in your face.
That makes sense? I can still feel the wetness in my face. And how arrogant I was to say something like that, but I deserved it.
I was arrogant too, but too shy, fortunately. So that brings us up to about 1979, and it's time for Adi to go settle a dispute in Hyderabad, where a local self-proclaimed perfect master was guiding the local Baba community. And when Adi heard of that, of course, he said his usual, Adi! And we made plans to go to Hyderabad and Secunderabad. And Adi was going to sort out the mess and clear it up. Accordingly, Adi, four of us were going to go on this trip. So there's Adi, Jack, Chris Pearson, and myself. Adi has to take care of some business in Pune, so he and Chris take off early, and we're supposed to meet in Dond. So Jack and I will be on one train, Chris and Adi on another. We'll meet in Dond and take off to Hyderabad. And on the train to Dond, Jack and I are yakking away, and I'm saying, "Gee, Jack, you know, you spent all this time with Adi, and in the future the Model E will be gone, and people are gonna want to hear about them, and you don't even have time to work. You'll just be on this speaking circuit. You'll be making speeches in Europe and all over America." And Jack's go, "Oh, no, well, okay, maybe. It's possible." And we don't realize that as this conversation is blabbering onward, that we are in Dond. And we were supposed to have gotten off the train and saying, "Here we are, Adi." And then all of a sudden, we can hear Chris's voice, "Jack, Jack!" And a look of terror pops on Jack's face, and I've never seen Jack move that fast. He was like a bullet. Out of that compartment, out of that train so quick, and Adi was not pleased. So we quickly load in all the luggage, and we're all in the compartment. You got to remember that Chris and I have worked very closely with Jack for a number of years, and we are close buddies. We're going to look out for our buddy. Adi begins to lay into Jack for this mega bungle because we almost
Missed the plane,
Yeah.
train.
Yeah. And that would have missed appointments in Hyderabad, and there would have been a lot of consequences. So then begins the addressing of Jack Small by Adi K Irani.
For my weaknesses.
Yes, so Adi really unleashed on Jack, and being Jack's close buddies, we shrunk away as far as we could, respective corners of the compartment, and literally I was like, squished myself so far into the corner of that's the compartment, you can't get any. I almost merged somehow with the atoms. So I want to just mention, though, that what I learned from watching Adi just utterly ream Jack, and watching Adi do that to several other people, and watching Mani having done that, and Padre, I noticed one thing. When they did it, there was no belittlement. There was no wrath. It was constructive. It was understandable. It made sense. And whatever they came out of their mouth, just like Tony, was actually all for the good. And anybody, and just listening to it, it was obvious. Very different from a number of other people in the midst of Baba work or other New Age work in other yoga communities that I've seen that have gotten angry at people because things weren't done a certain way or mistakes were made. When in those cases there's disparagement, belittlement, ad hominem remarks, etc. It's a very different type of thing from what I saw the Mondli do, and it really made me appreciate having seen the Mondli do it the right way. So now we're sitting in the compartment, and there's a little tension in the air, and so what does Adi do to break it? Well, it's like, as a quick aside, I saw Adi ream some big, tall, hulking Indian man who came in. He must have really bungled something badly. Adi just blasted him in Marathi for a long time, and this big guy's going, "Yes, Adi, no, Adi, yes, Adi, no, Adi." And so he says, "Okay, so you can leave." And then he turns to me, "Where were we now?" It's like Adi had nothing invested in it, nothing. So then, in the same vein, he turns to Jack.
And takes a piece of candy of some kind and offers me this sweet candy. It's amazing.
Not just offers it,
Puts it in my mouth.
like a mother feeding a baby. That's how they do it in India. And
I'd forgotten that till now. Yes.
And then the mood just lightened up, and then the fun began. Literally, just travel with Adi, you're going to have a lot of fun. So then we arrived in Hyderabad, and that's when in high school and college, I was a water polo player and a swimmer. I never did do anything with football, but I learned, we might remember the old flying wedge technique where the guards will form a wedge and protect the quarterback as you charges down the field. Well, that's what Adi had us do. We became a flying wedge around him, like a cowcatcher on a train. And as Adi would walk off the station platform, these people would just be throwing themselves at his feet, and we'd be, please, no bowing down, please, no bowing down. We'd have to pick him up, because Adi didn't want anyone bowing down at his feet. So that's one of the things that happened.
I remember that, thank you.
Yeah. Then, so anyway, Adi resolved that huge dilemma there, and one of the main leaders of the group had, Mr. Shastri, wonderful chap, had sort of been drawn to this perfect master. So Adi spent a lot of personal time and helped him to see the light and cleared up that whole dilemma. So Mr. Perfect Master lost his flock. Then a few months later, they were opening up a new center down in Guntur in south of India. So Adi was invited to go open the center up. So Jack, Robert Dreyfus, myself, and I, we all packed up and made off. We arrived in Guntur, and there were about 500 people there. These are all people that Adi had, in his correspondence and prior trips and travels, had extensive contact with. So he knew just hundreds of people all over. And so they had a big luncheon, and with all these narrow tables and chairs, narrow tables and chairs with little palms of leaves as plates. And Adi walked up and down the aisles, and everybody is turning around, and they're chit-chatting with him, and he's just friends with everybody. And he gave great, vibrant talks. And then, did you want to add anything else, Jack?
You got it down. You got it expressed very
Okay,
well.
so then suddenly we're leaving the next morning, and at about 4 a.m. in the morning, I get a call from Jack. Jack is sleeping in the same room with Adi, and Robert and I are sleeping in a separate room.
Yes, this is when Adi suddenly lays down and collapses. I don't know what to do, and I call you. And we have you, me, and one other person,
Robert Dreyfus.
Robert Dreyfus. And we call the Mandali, and we have somebody does a autopsy and says that he's passed away. And the Mandali tell us what to do. They say, go in one vehicle, don't stop. And what they have is they have various toll, would that be a way, what's it?
Well, checkpoints at various
Right,
states
right.
as you cross the country,
Right.
going from east to west.
And if you stop and you have a dead body, they're going to want to know how that happened. So they told us, don't stop. I remember putting something over Adi's face so they couldn't see.
Well, what we did is we actually wrapped Adi up in a sheet, but there's something that happened prior to that, so let me just mention quickly. Adi began to have shortness of breath, so the saga went on for several hours. And we did mouth-to-mouth and resuscitation, heart massage. Doctor came, was inept. We rushed Adi to the hospital, continuing with CPR, and the hospital was, to say it was ill-equipped is to overly exaggerate.
And we realized he had passed away, and we called Mirzad, asked what to do.
Oh, but first we should say, on Adi's last breath, he did say, as he said, Baba, and that was his last full breath, his last utterance.
Right.
And then shallow breathing thereafter, and then gradual change of color in his face. So then he was pronounced dead by a doctor at the hospital. No autopsy was performed.
And we called Mirzad, they said, do not stop at any of the stations. They have these stations, what would you call it?
Checkpoints.
Checkpoints, because they're going to ask details of how this man passed away. So I sat in the back with Adi covered with a sheet, so nobody could see anything about Adi's condition.
Right. Adi in the middle, Jack on one side, yours truly on the other, Robert in the front, Shastriji driving. And then after 20 hours Shastriji was fading fast. So I took over the wheel and we made it through around Pune and down Mehrabad Road, and all of a sudden there was Jalduster and Erich. Go ahead. You have a question?
Did you really not stop at the checkpoints, and how did you manage to just zoom on through?
That's a good question, and Shastriji knew the ropes, and somehow we just slid right on through. He was a wealthy guy, well connected. He sponsored the whole tour anyway, and he just had a way. So somehow we made it right through. Yeah, he probably pleased their palms. That's what I'm thinking.
But Adi was in a.
What year was that?
This is 1980, March.
Fourth.
Yeah, March 4th of 1980.
Wasn't he in Myrtle Beach in '79?
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
That's right.
But Adi was in a sheet.
Yeah, we wrapped him up in a sheet, head to toe.
He didn't have a hat on or something. How did? I mean, that would look a little odd going through.
Was his face showing or just?
Nope,
Although you kind of wrapped him like a.
we just wrapped him up. Yep.
Oh, and he was sitting straight up?
Yep.
What
There was
would
no
they-
room in the car.
What
I mean,
would
it's-
they think he was, though, I wonder?
I don't know, and I don't know what Shastriji said.
I was in the back with Adi, and
Interesting.
I had a white sheet. And I said, I realized this is my last ride with Adi.
So then we arrived at Mehrabad, and I guess, I don't know how many people were there, but just a large crowd. Then Adi was placed in a casket and lowered to the ground, and Mera threw a handful of dirt, and prayers were said, and it was farewell to Adi K Irani. I should add one other thing that Adi said that was kind of unique in Guntur. Ever since I've been going to India since 1973 and hanging around Adi, I noticed he would fairly often reference the fact that he planned on living quite a few more years and doing more Baba work. He was on fire for Baba work. So then 1979 rolls around and Adi's saying, I'm going for 10 more years. That's my run here, 10 more years. So then suddenly in Guntur, the night before he passes away, he says, you know, boys, he says, I have all my affairs wrapped up. I don't owe anybody anything. Nobody owes me. He says, everything that has been in my family's name is all transferred to the trust. He says, I'm free to go anytime. We didn't think of anything. We didn't see any implications there. But it was unusual and atypical. And so the next morning, it was bon voyage to Adi K Irani.
Steve?
Yes,
Was he cremated or buried?
he was buried. And I don't know why some of the Mandali were cremated and some were not. Anybody have an idea about that?
They chose themselves,
Oh, they chose themselves?
demanded.
Oh, okay. Yes?
So I understand the upper area is stone, where below area where the men are buried in big graves a lot easier. That may be part of it.
I see, yeah. I see, a lot of rocks and stone in the ground above.
Solid rock apparently up above. where
Up above, I see, almost solid rock up there, huh?
Yeah.
In upper Mehrabad. So lower Mehrabad has a lot of earth, easy to dig, that makes sense. Thank you for clarifying that.
What do you most remember about Adi?
His focus on not letting anything distract him from remembering Mir Baba. Different things came up, people got upset about stuff, and he always maintained his focus. Didn't lose it, like others, including myself, did. And it was natural for most people to get upset and not keep control of themselves. Adi was able to keep stable, whatever was going on.
That maybe some of you were there, I don't know, you might have seen it. But one time, Adi used to hold these meetings every Friday at the Ahmednagar Center. And all these young Westerners would be there with their long hair and sitting cross-legged on the floor. And I think they were probably the whole place would be packed. Probably, I didn't ever do a body count, but 40, maybe 50 people. The place would be packed. So at any rate, there wasn't a lot of room to move around in there. You kind of wiggled in and squeezed in, and people accommodated you. So the whole place would be kind of filled up. And at one point, this young feller gets up and begins to walk around, stepping over people, through people, and staring and gazing at the paintings of Baba on the wall. Let's say Adi's at that end of the hall speaking, and this man is looking at Baba photos here and there and stepping through people and blocking the vision. So, of course, Adi says, "Sir, may I ask what you're doing?" And he said, "Yes, I received intuitive inner guidance from Baba that it's okay for me to walk around and look at his beautiful photographs." I learned a lot from this one. This one saved me in Baba work many times. Without a second's hesitation, Adi says back. And you could just tell that this had come up before, quite a few times. So Adi said, "Yes, and Baba just gave me inner guidance that if you don't sit down, I should throw you out." Well, this young, long-haired fella, he became quite unnerved from that. And I guess his intuitive inner guidance was kind of withered under the heat of Adi's quick retort. And he did sit down post-haste. Had he not, then several of us would have shown him a polite but firm exit. So that's just a sample of Adi and Adi's stories. Does anyone have any other questions or Adi's story they would like to share?
I have a question. I'm familiar generally with Jack's story because I've known him quite a long time, but I don't know your connection with Baba, how you came to.
You mean with Adi?
Well, with Adi, yes, with Adi. How did you end up in India every summer? And
Well, I didn't go there every summer. No, 73, 74, 77, 79, 80, but not every year. Jack was an annual boy until he moved there in 1975, and then he became a perennial boy.
well, how long did you stay though when you went? Were you there like 3 months at a time?
I'd stay minimum 4 months at a time. I took the long way through college. I can make up that quarter later. But I don't know if I'm going to get a chance to make up a quarter with a Mondale. So. But how I came to Baba, that's I think a story for another day. It's good. It's an interesting story. But I think we're really here to kind of think about Adi and Baba. But thank you for asking. Any other questions or
So
stories?
what kind of things did you do with Adi? What kind of work did you do when you went? And what specifically with Adi did you do? Because you haven't said anything about
Oh,
that.
well, one of the things Adi did was he wanted to have his, well, actually he was pressured by Jimmy Mistry, husband of Rhoda Mistry, to publish a book with his writings and or speeches. So somehow I got selected as the person to do that, although I did not major in English literature. Psychology and English lit, I think, are two divergent fields. But nonetheless, I got the nod and I wasn't going to turn it down. Fortunately, I subsequently married someone who was an English lit major, so it worked out okay because we joined forces for the completion. In the meantime, what I did was I began to amass materials with Adi. He would say, well, here's some materials. What do you think of these, Steve? And let's talk about it. And so we began to sift and sort through just masses of materials to pick out selected items that he thought, and I thought would be appropriate. So that's how that came about. And then, I always appreciate, like for example, you're recording this. This is great. And Jack and I, every night, we would go walk through the trust compound and go visit Adi to say goodnight. We'd hang out with him for a half hour, 45 minutes. We'd talk about anything. And it wasn't necessarily, what did Baba say about this? We would say, what do you think about this? Well, so-and-so said this. It was a little bit rude. And what do you think about it? And we would just ask mundane, ordinary, everyday questions. And so Jack and I would say, well, what do you think what will be his answer to our questions tonight? So we'd come up with what we thought Adi would say. Every time we could never pre-guess Adi, and his answers were so stellar, and we were so certain we would always remember what he said. Big mistake. I hope I carry that lesson forward into future births. You hear great stuff, boy, you note it down like Phyllis Frederick did. But we sure had great times.
That's
Yes,
another question
time of
I
our life.
have. You said how fun it was to travel with Adi. Can you give some stories?
Well, again, I should have written a lot of this down. I mean, sometimes we'd be in a compartment with people, and they would be utter strangers, say a couple or a family, and Adi would just start to schmooze with them and warm them up and engage with them, and then pretty soon everybody's laughing and joking and having lots of fun. And what jokes were, I fortunately didn't write it down. And then pretty soon he's talking about Baba, and then all of a sudden they're really interested, and it was just kind of magical to do that. Here's a quick example of when we were in Guntur. So Adi mentioned that he was talking about Baba, and about 500 people was the head count. And he had mentioned the story that I'm sure many of you have heard that occurred when Adi was a young man in the 20s. And there would be these darshan programs. I mean, in Lower Mehrabad, they had 500 people living there full time, and a lot of people coming in for darshan programs and things. As people would be coming through, and Adi would be there helping and assisting Baba, every once in a while there would be an extraordinarily attractive young lady. And Adi was a very handsome, dashing young man. And so he couldn't help but notice. And right then, Baba would turn to him and say, "What are you thinking?" And Adi's reluctant to share, because not only is this girl that he's never met before, but her mother is standing right behind her, and her father right behind the mother. And Adi's thinking, this isn't going to go over so well, not only for me, but for Baba too. And so he said, "Oh, what's a nice darshan program? Nice people, good atmosphere." And Baba would give him a little frown. And so this happened a number of times, and finally, not just one darshan program, but many programs, and Baba would then ask the question at the precise time, "What are you thinking, Adi?" And again, the faux response. So then finally, they're alone one time, and Baba says, "You fool, you don't think I know exactly what you're thinking? You should be telling me these things." And he said, for example, Adi, he said, "I know about the time when you did thus and such, so-and-so, 15 years ago, some little trivial incident that Adi never thought about ever since he ever did it, never told anybody because it wasn't worth telling." And Baba said, "I know about that. I know everything. So when I say to tell me, I'm expecting you to tell me." And so Adi, being the good negotiator that he was, said, "Okay, Baba, you got me on that. Okay. But just do one thing. Don't ask me in front of, let me whisper in your ear. Let me do that. Thank you." And Baba said, "Nothing doing." Who gives the orders around here? And Adi had to acquiesce. So the next darshan program, when something like this occurs, Baba again turns to Adi at the precise moment. And so Adi is now about to blurt out, but Baba then says, lets him off the hook gently. So then Adi was retelling that story, and so then the whole audience, these 500 people that are all strangers unto me, but I'm evidently not to Adi. So then somebody says, "Yeah, well, Adi, so why don't you tell us now? It's been quite a long time, so time to share." And Adi said, this is some older gentleman asking, and Adi, everybody's laughing. The whole crowd is kind of chuckling, something personal, private. And Adi says, "Well, sir, I'm going to invite you to take a walk down memory lane, and ask yourself what you might be thinking when you were that age if you were in my shoes. So the whole crowd kind of chuckles and they're all having fun. And then Adi says, Adi's amused, and he says, and if you're a young man, then you don't have to take the walk down memory lane. You can just ask yourself right now. So then everybody kind of cracks up. And then somebody says, well, Adi, since you told Baba, you might as well tell us. And Adi says, listen, I haven't told anybody else in all these years, so why should I start now? And everybody cracks up again. Just, pleasant, innocent fun like that. That sort of thing. No stand-up jokes, just kind of spontaneous interaction. Go ahead.
So let's get Tom to, let Tom to share something.
Tom, did you have you had some nice times with Adi. Did you have anything you wanted to share? Or
Yeah, there is. In front here, so she can film you.
This was back when I was at college in New York City, and I discovered at the beginning of my connection with Mayor Baba, I discovered the Monday evening meetings at the Winterfeld's home in Manhattan. Went there, and on one of the evenings, not long after that, Adi Irani was visiting New York City to make preparations for Baba's arrival in 1958. He came quite a bit early, so I met him there. When he found out where I was living, which was about a half block from Sheridan Square in what's called Greenwich Village, and another half block or maybe a block from the Sheridan Square was the town home of the Phelps Stokes family where Baba stayed. I think it was 32 and 34.
88 Grove Street. 88 Grove Street.
Yeah. So when Adi found that out, and he had just met me, he insisted on calling the Phelps Stokes family and arranged with one of the family to meet me at the house so he could show me. And I had just, the year before I had married. So he took my wife and I to the Phelps Stokes home and showed us and talked about everything that had happened there back in, was it 31? And again, 32?
And 34.
And 34. So that was such a blessing. That's the kind of individual he was. It was his joy to fulfill me on those marvelous experiences.
Thank you, Tom. Anybody else, any questions or stories to relate? Yes, please.
Somehow I was invited to help I was invited to set up interviews when Adi came in '79. So two wonderful memories of that time. One day at the end of an evening when a lot of people had come to see Adi, a woman came and Baba was, Adi was stationed in the, what was the name of that? The farm shed.
Yeah.
Okay, so we were on the porch and the woman came and she went in, she came back out and she left, and then Adi came out and he threw down a pack of cigarettes and he says, I tell you, this woman came and she was talking about this habit. She cannot give up smoking. And I told her, Madam, you can give up smoking. Take Baba's name, repeat his name, and it will be very easy. And she threw the pack of cigarettes down and she walked out, and I'm very happy. And then there was this long, pregnant pause, and then he said, I have given up cigarettes many times. Now I am going to have a cigarette. And he took the cigarette.
I remember that, yeah.
the other was, somehow, few of us who had been helping went with Adi to Florence to the train station when you talked about being on the train
Right.
to say goodbye to Adi. So then a number of us tromped onto the train, and Adi and Jack are seated there in the train, and there's about 4 or 5 or 6 of us, and all at once we heard no all aboard or any sort of indication that the train was going to start, and all at once the train starts off at quite a clip, and those of us who weren't going with Adi and Jack to Washington DC, had to run off, make our way as quickly as possible off the train, and I was the first in, so I was the last out, and I didn't know. In India, you learn as a kid how to jump off a train when it's going fast. And I just went clunk, I just like walked off, and of course I, fell and banged my, big gash in my elbow, and Adi and Jack are looking out the train and screaming, and I'm just like, So that evening from Washington, Jack, connects the phone and says, Adi would like to speak to you, and Adi gets on the train and sort of berates me for, Madam, don't you know how to jump off of a train? Jump off of a moving train? No, I've never tried that. And then he gave me the lesson of how you have to keep running in the direction that the train, the train is going. So for future incarnations, I guess I know that. And then he says, yes, madam, yes, that is the way, Baba's way. He gives you a kick and he gives you a kiss. The kiss was being with Adi and sort of closer companionship, and then the kick was, I think I was so attached to Adi by the time he left, maybe he had to, give me a little goodbye kick. But he said, Baba is always like that. He gives you a kick and a kiss and a kiss.
Well, I have something to share.
Very charming, thank you,
I
Kathy.
just want to share something on the heels of that one. One of the things I remember about Adi is his sayings. And I remember him once talking about the cigarette one, him saying, and I can't do the Indian accent, but he said, it's very hard to give up a habit. If you get rid of the H, you still have a bit. If you get rid of the A, you haven't lost the bit. If you get rid of the B, you still have it. And if you get rid of the I, you still have T.
I remember that. Yeah.
He had another one talking about, I think he had an interest in healing. I think he was, I think that was one of his areas of interest. And I remember him saying, talking about doctors, and he said that the worst kind of doctor is the doctor that has to physically examine you. He said the second worst kind of doctor is the doctor that has to talk to you to diagnose you. And he said the best kind of doctor has to neither see you nor talk to you to diagnose you. That was one of his things.
Have you met many doctors like that?
I've met some, yeah, I have, yeah. But I remember that interest. I have one other story to tell, which is a very different one, and I'm a little bit unsure about having this on tape, but I'll let it be here. I went to India for the first time in 1972, and I met Adi actually at the Saroj Canteen the night of July 12th, right after the Dooney had taken place, and I showed up from Nasik around then, and I had long hair and all the beard and all that stuff, and that's when I met Adi, and he was a very imposing figure. I always thought he looked a little like Dracula myself. That was sort of, but I got to know him during that trip, and one evening I was staying at the Dalit Lodge, which was right next to the trust compound there. And one evening I was sitting with Adi outside of his office, and he was just trying to get to know me a little bit, and I didn't know anything. I was very new to Baba. And so he wanted to know, somehow it got into sort of my experience with marijuana. And he wanted to know what it was like. And I didn't know anything about you know, Baba's, I knew Baba's statements about it, but I wasn't sensitive to all that. So I gave him, I told him, here's what it's like to smoke marijuana. And he said to me, you know, I've always wanted to try it. And so I said to him, well, if you think that's good, you should really try LSD.
You said that to him.
Daniel.
By the way, he never did try LSD.
We can only conclude that Daniel is one bold boy. Had Daniel said that to me, I might have taken him up on it. I'll share one story I really liked. Once in a while, Adi would be asked a question, and it's not a story, it's an answer. It's a great answer to a good question. Sometimes Adi would, not often, but once in a while, somebody would say, well, Adi, I'm really trying to love Baba. I don't know really how to, I'm trying to love him more, but I don't know how to do that. And Adi would say, this is because you're trying. This is something that you don't have to try. This is something that you only have to create the circumstances. So everybody's attentive. He said, for example, you have a flower. You put it in nourishing soil. You put it in the sunlight. You give it water. That's the environment. You create the circumstances. The soil, the sunlight, and the water. The flower, the plant grows of its own. And the flower blooms on its own. You have nothing to do with it. You just create the circumstances. So in like manner, all you do is remember him. Anything and everything that reminds you of him, think of that. His name, repeat his name, Baba photos, Baba meetings, books, readings, meditating on Baba, anything and everything that reminds you of Baba. The more you think of that, that will be equivalent to your soil and sunlight and water, and then the flower of love will bloom all by itself in your heart. This is a prayer that Adi wrote in 1979, and he began sharing at every single talk that he gave, this prayer. So we heard him say this many, many times.
Okay, we're talking about the prayer that Adi wrote at while staying at Neher Center. And I was so taken with the prayer that I went up to him right afterwards and asked him if I could have a copy of that prayer. He referred me to Jack. He said, get a copy of that from Jack. So Jack, in his own handwriting, I have it somewhere, I have not been able to find it, but I wrote it down on a separate piece of paper so I could have it with me all the time. But Adi told me that he had written that prayer in response to all the young people or all the people that came to him for private interviews. And there were so many questions and so much. I don't know that he used the word distress, but that's my essential feeling about it. The distress they had in asking him for help, that he wrote this prayer.
See, this is such an august moment, but I'm just remembering another funny story. A woman came, Adi told Tom and Yvonne with great upset. A woman came to him and she was in great distress because she had just had a child and she didn't know what to do. And Adi said to Tom and Yvonne, she had a child and she didn't know what to do with the child. I said, pick it up, cuddle it, talk to it, feed it. And then he says to Tom and Yvonne, what? These people, these Westerners are crazy. She has a child, she doesn't know what to do. So he had all sorts of interesting dilemmas from people.
My goodness.
Talk to it, cuddle it.
Love it.
I don't know what just came to mind.
That's really cute and kind of wild. What a wild tale, but thank you for sharing that, Kathy. So thus we have, from experiences like that, Adi then put his heart and mind together and wrote this prayer with all these wacky Westerners in mind. Y'all.
I have to admit that Daryl and I went to one of those interviews. I mean, had a private, or more, maybe more than one. So we asked Adi about our sex life. That was he never got married, did he?
No.
No, okay. But anyway, that was a big question back then. And I just want to share that one of the great joys of my life was when he gave those talks, and they were, 20 in a row? It was phenomenal. Every night he gave a talk in '79. And I was so happy that I could bring him water. I brought some distilled water or something, and always brought it up to the stage for him. That was my little special moments with him. Anyway, this is Adi's prayer. Beloved Mayor Baba, bless us all, so that in the stress and strain of our daily life and the fluctuations of our mind, we learn to relax wholly and wholeheartedly and float on the ocean of your love and call for your breath of joy, your breeze of compassion, and your wind of strength to flood into every fiber of our body, every corner of our mind, and every space of our heart, to cleanse us of all our impurity and to make us worthy of your love, of your obedience, of your service, and above all, your pleasure. Jai Baba.
Hey, Bob.
Thank you so much. And maybe we could close with a beautiful prayer to Baba.